Hello world! Welcome back to the CyberSec 101 series. In this video, we will be discussing biometrics in cybersecurity. Biometric authentication belongs to the something you are or do factor, and is what solely comprises that factor. This can include anything from facial recognition as something you are, to voice recognition as something you do. All biometric authentication has something to do with your genetic and biological makeup that can uniquely identify you. Biometric authentication is much more complex and oftentimes much more expensive to implement than passwords and hardware tokens. That is because the technology involved in identifying and verifying someone based on their biology is literally adding an organic component to what is otherwise a non-organic process. Passwords and hardware tokens are much easier to implement because they do not have to account for any sort of organic aspect. In other words, integrating biology into technology is much more difficult than having to integrate more technology into technology, if that makes sense. As with other types of authentications, there are some biometrics that are more accurate in identifying someone than others. And in general, the more accurate they are, the more they cost to implement. Iris scanning is one of the most, if not the most accurate forms of biometric authentication. That is because everybody has unique patterns in their irises, with no two people having the same patterns in their irises. This is similar to how there are no two snowflakes that have the same fractal pattern when reflected and refracted in light. Every iris is unique, just like every snowflake is unique. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, we have voice recognition. Voice recognition is one of the least accurate, if not the least accurate, forms of biometric authentication. This is because two people could potentially have the same tone and pitch in their voice, which can oftentimes confuse an authentication system depending on how similar the voices are. It is also possible with the right range and practice to train someone's voice to sound just like another person's voice. Voices do not share the same type of unique patterning that irises do, so it is much easier to bypass a system that uses voice recognition than it would be to bypass a system that uses iris recognition. Now that we've identified an accurate and an inaccurate biometric authentication method, let's talk about cost versus accuracy between the two methods. Ideally, you would want to implement the most secure biometric method you can afford, which may not end up being iris recognition, but methods such as retinal scanning and fingerprint scanning, while not as accurate as iris scanning, are still relatively secure methods of authentication. You could further increase the security by implementing multi-factor authentication along with your biometric authentication to help add an extra layer or layers of security to your authentication system. With more accuracy comes more cost, because it is much harder to integrate something that can render and process as much detail as what is in the patterns of an iris. Voice recognition, however, is much cheaper to implement, because it really just involves the user speaking into a mic, and some software or whatever on the back end of the system performs the audio recognition of the voice. The mic and software can be very cheap to get, or even free, or already built into the system you are using. It does not require even a fraction of the processing power to analyze someone's voice, as opposed to analyzing iris patterns. With biometrics, due to there always being a level of inaccuracy depending on the method, there will always be a chance that someone is falsely accepted into a system or falsely rejected from accessing the system. The false acceptance rate, or FAR, is the percentage of authentication instances where unauthorized personnel are incorrectly accepted into a system. The false acceptance rate increases when false positives occur, which are the actual instances of when an unauthorized person has been accepted by the system. The false rejection rate, or FRR, is the percentage of authentication instances where authorized personnel are incorrectly rejected from accessing a system. The false rejection rate increases when false negatives occur, which are the actual instances of when an authorized person has been rejected by the system. False negatives can also be viewed as false alarms in a sense. Using our iris and voice recognitions again, let's look at what happens to the FRR and FAR depending on the accuracy of the biometric. We see that the more accurate the biometric is, the less the FAR and FRR are. And the less accurate the biometric is, the more the FAR and FRR are. Iris scanning will cause a much lower number of false positives and false negatives to occur, whereas voice scanning will cause a much higher number of false positives and false negatives to occur. And that wraps it up for this video. We hope you will continue to indulge in the content discussed in this series. If you enjoyed the video, secure that like button and hack the subscribe button to attack the YouTube algorithm so that we can bring more content to your feed. Please feel free to give us any feedback, good or bad, we don't discriminate, in the comment section down below. And we hope to see you all again in the next video. This is Almond Milk, signing out.